Welcome to Breaking Up with Addiction. Breaking Up with Addiction is proudly sponsored by experts you can trust. Kindbridge Behavioral Health. Safe, non-judgmental counseling just a tap away. I'm Corinne Wright, certified executive and recovery coach.
And I'm Gwendolyn Boyd McGee, licensed clinical professional counselor. Listeners, I hope that you were able to complete your homework from last week. Just remember that creating a relapse prevention plan can be essential for avoiding a relapse. It can also be extremely helpful to identify your personal triggers because you have a strategy in place to help you avoid them.
In today's episode, we'll be talking about 3 pillars of recovery, a powerful framework to help those in recovery stay grounded and build lasting, sustainable change. We're going beyond the typical discussion and exploring what real recovery can look like when you have support, accountability, and a plan to guide you.
So today's guest is Dave Yeager. He is an 11-year veteran of the U.S. Army and someone who knows firsthand about the challenges of overcoming a gambling addiction. As a recovering gambler, Dave has made it his mission to raise awareness about gambling addiction, particularly within the military community. He is the author of Fall In, a resource designed to help military personnel and veterans navigate the struggles of problem gambling. And he also hosts the Fall In podcast. Dave's recovery journey is centered around 3 powerful pillars: roadblocks, accountability, and connection. These principles have played a crucial role in his personal transformation, and today he's here to share them with you. Welcome to the show, Dave.
Thank you so much for having me. What an honor.
Absolutely. We're happy to have you here, Dave. Can you start out by sharing just a little bit about your journey from the military service to recovery with us?
Sure. Yeah, I actually first fell into my addiction. It was in 2001, not long after the events of 9/11. I was active duty in the Army at the time, was in my first marriage. I was stationed here in the United States, but had come down on orders to go to the Republic of Korea. And it was kind of a tense time for me and my family. And not too long after I came down on those orders, of course, the events of 9/11 happened. So not only was I going to be away from my wife and my kids for a year, but I was going to do it right after some pretty earth-shaking events here in the United States. So hopped on a plane, flew over to Korea, got there, was already a mess. As we're landing in country, the first thing I notice is that there's Patriot missiles pointed at us as we're landing, which is, not comforting to begin with. So we get on the ground, they get us in our transport, they take us up to Seoul, which is where the headquarters for the entire peninsula was, where I was going to go ahead, get processed in, and then I was going to get sent down to the southern end of the peninsula in Busan, where I would have 2 squads that I'd be in charge of. I'd be the non-commissioned officer in charge of Busan, and then a squad in Daegu, which was about an hour away. So I get into Seoul. They put me up in a very, very nice hotel right there on the base. Mm-hmm. Got my stuff dropped off. I was stressed. I was angry. I was fearful, but I wasn't ready to sleep. So I got something to eat and I'm walking around the hotel. And as I'm walking around, I happen to notice a casino style slot room right there on the military base, right there in the hotel. Wow. So yeah. An interesting thing is here in the States, they don't have those. So I didn't even know they existed. So I'm like, okay. I mean, I grew up in Pennsylvania, an hour and a half, 2 hours away from Atlantic City. When I was in my 20s, I used to go to Atlantic City and I could take money with me, spend it. And when I was done, I would go home. So I'm like, all right, I'll take some money out. I'll go play for a while until I can sleep. And then I'll go crash out and I'll get this thing started. Not long into me sitting down and playing, the first thing I notice is my shoulders start to relax. I start to breathe a little bit better. I'm like, okay, I'm relaxing now. I might be able to sleep. And then I make what I often call the biggest mistake a budding compulsive gambler can make, and I won. And I didn't break the bank. They didn't throw me out of the place, but it was enough that in that moment I can remember all of that fear, all of that anger, all of that anxiety kind of washing away in that moment. And while I won't say that I became a disordered gambler in that moment, what I will say is that a seed was planted, because over the next several months, that went from I got down to my squad down in Pusan and discovered immediately another one of these rooms down there, much smaller, much less elaborate, but still the same thing. So over the first 3 months, it went from, okay, this is fun on a Friday night to Friday, Saturday, Sunday to now I'm going weeknights. And it's slowly moving from this is a fun little escape to I need to do this. You know, it basically built itself up into an obsession in not very long of a time. I'd say it was probably about a 3-month time. And it went from, you know, what was happening was I set up an account there on the base. My wife would put money into that account, you know, whenever we had a paycheck. So I'd have something to spend. Well, eventually I started spending all that. So then I would give her different excuses as to how I needed more money. So then she'd put a little more in until that didn't work anymore. You know, she stopped sending extra money. So then all the household goods that I brought with me, I sold those. Now this is building up into a full-blown obsession.
Yeah.
Eventually that turned into me borrowing money from my subordinates, which if you know anything about being a leader in the Army, that's a no-no. All right.
Yeah.
Which eventually led to my biggest mistake, which was I actually stole from my own unit.
Oh.
It was not an intense amount of money, and it doesn't matter. I still stole a petty cash amount from my unit. And by now I was at the point where I had myself convinced that if I go in there, it doesn't matter. I'll win it back. I'll put it back. Nobody will ever know any better. While at the same time, what's going on in my head is you're not going to win. You're going to walk out with nothing, because by then, any time that I would go to this room, I'd walk away with nothing. It's just how it became at that point. It became a full-blown obsession over the course of the year that I spent in Korea. The day or two after I did that, my unit noticed it, and they called Criminal Investigation Division and started an investigation. And I said, stop, just come over here, let's sit down. And I immediately confessed to what I did, because I was under so much shame and guilt. It felt unbearable. Turned myself in, was immediately pulled out of my leadership position, and rightly so, by the way. Was sent back to Seoul, and I'm getting near the end of my tour by now, so they can decide what they want to do with me. Well, I remember sitting down in front of my commander. So when my commander decided they were going to let me out of the Army, he again didn't really know what to do. He said again, we don't really know what to do with you. We're going to let you out under honorable conditions so that you can go get the help that you need. I think what was missing there is they didn't really know what that help looked like, because they, like me, didn't understand that I was in the throes of an addiction. You know, I didn't know gambling was an addiction. I just know I couldn't stop. So over the course of the next 6 years, I was divorced from my wife. I lost contact with my kids for 2 years. I moved back home to Pennsylvania, and it didn't get better. I'm going to tell you the story, kind of the catalyst until I finally gave in and went into treatment. It was a Friday night. I had driven down taken about $500 and went down to my favorite casino. By now, I knew that when I went to a casino, I was walking out with nothing, because I was so obsessed by just sitting there and gambling. I couldn't stop doing it. So I get down there Friday night. As I'm driving down there, I'm yelling at myself, turn around. You know what's going to happen. You're going to spend everything. And at one point I look up in the mirror and I can see my face in the mirror. My face is bright red. The veins on my head are popping out. You can see tears in my eyes. I'm punching the roof of the car, yet my foot is still on the gas pedal driving towards this casino. I get to the casino. I finish the trip. Yeah. Get to the casino. I park. I'm still stressed. I'm still all of this. I walk up to the door of the casino. I open it. I hear the sounds and the bells and the whistles, and instantly I was calm. Instantly I felt, quote unquote, okay again. So I go in there. It was a Friday night. And I spend, and of course, not too long after I'm there, I won. So I was way up on money. And of course, I played until I ran out of money. And I'm like, okay, I've been here overnight. It's Saturday morning. Let me go home. I'm depressed and shameful as usual. Let me go home. I get in the car. I turn on the car, and I hear basically spiritual music on the radio. And I'm like, why is there Sunday morning music on Saturday? And I realized that I wasn't in the casino overnight. I'd been there 36 hours and didn't know it. That's how bad this addiction had become. Yeah.
That's a lot. And Gwen and I have both experienced clients who have mentioned that they spent days sitting there, but to hear this backstory as to how you came to this. The things that stood out to me were, this drastic change in your life because there was a change in your environment. And obviously there seemed to be some type of boredom there too. And then there's this one familiar thing that's like, oh, that could be an outlet. That could be fun. And then it sucks you into this world you never even knew you had any association with. I'm sure you never fathomed you'd be addicted to gambling before all of that.
Not even close. I mean, had you asked me prior to November of 2001 whether I would be addicted to gambling, my answer to you would have been what? Because there's no way I would have ever even considered it a possibility. So you're right. And I think one of the things bringing up what you just talked about is what I didn't realize then too is that with all of the stress and all the anxiety and all the things that were going on, I wasn't equipped to cope with them. I had no idea how to cope with all this. So to me, once I found that escape, that immediately became my coping mechanism.
Yeah.
So,
Right.
yeah. So finally, after that event is when I decided to give in, and I literally gave up. I'm like, I can't figure this out on my own. Nobody can possibly understand the insane thoughts that are going on in my head, because alongside of wanting to be a father, wanting to be a good, productive citizen was this obsessive, can't stop gambling person. And I thought nobody could understand these Jekyll and Hyde thoughts that are going on through my head. And I had been looking. I'd been looking for gambling treatment. And finally, I went to a VA where the VA counselor pulls out this old, stapled together, dusty packet of papers that says VA Gambling Treatment Program on it. I made the calls. I set it up. And when I finally got to Cleveland, or Brecksville, Ohio at the time, where it was being held, I got in there. They did all the in-processing. They got me in. I sat in front of a counselor, and for the first time in 6 years, somebody understood me. For the first time in 6 years, somebody spoke a language that made sense to me, and I started to understand that this was an addiction and that it was treatable. Right. There's a lot more to the story that goes beyond that. I did eventually relapse many years later after I had married my now wife, the woman who's now my wife, and got myself back into treatment. And when I did, this was in 2020, so 5 years ago we're talking about. The difference between 2020 and 2007 is in 2007, I knew I had a gambling problem. In 2020, I came to the realization and the decision that I am powerless over this addiction unless I continue to do something about it. And I continue to pay attention to it. And that's why I'm where I am today, is because to this day, I pay attention to this addiction day after day. And the work is not work to me anymore. It's just part of who I am.
Right. Well, Dave, what were some of the biggest challenges you faced during your recovery, and what lessons have stuck with you the most?
Probably the biggest challenge was letting out pieces of myself. I realized when I fully got into recovery that I hid from everybody. The smallest things. I wanted nobody to know who I was, what I did. And one of the ways that I overcame that is in this recovery go around, what I did is I started saying to my wife, I'm uncomfortable telling you this and I need to tell you. So what it did was it gave me permission to get uncomfortable with who I am. And the more I started getting uncomfortable with who I am, the less uncomfortable it became. And the more I started sharing the truths about myself and the things that were really going on with me, the less the gambling urges started to be there, I noticed. I started to tear apart the me underneath.
Do you feel like the guilt and the shame is what was kind of really driving this?
Yes, guilt and shame were part of it, but I think the bigger part of it is I grew up in a very dysfunctional and abusive home, and I learned at a very early age to hide from people. I wanted nobody to know who I was or where I came from or the things that went on in my house. And that kind of carried all the way through my adult life until I finally had to start to learn to let go. I had to learn that I was okay. I had to learn that it was okay for me to talk about me because I'm not a bad person. I think that was probably one of the bigger things.
Right. That had to be extremely liberating to get that kind of freedom to just, be who you are and not have to be concerned as much with what, the perceptions of other people.
Absolutely. It's amazing to just be okay with who I am. And I'd still have moments. Don't get me wrong. I'm a work in progress, but it feels so much better to just, I think acceptance is probably the biggest word, because I'm accepting who I am as a person, and I am flawed. I'm not perfect. I didn't come from a perfect place, and I'm not going to be perfect.
Right. We're all a work in progress here. And if it isn't one thing, it's another. Everybody has something, but
we all have our challenges.
Yes. But pursuing the help. That's where I'm proud of you, Dave, because that seems like the thing that turned the corner with how you were even able to open up to your wife and make a safe space for yourself to communicate about your addiction. Yeah.
For sure. Yeah, I agree with you. What kind of
stigmas when it comes to the military? Because this space there's a lot of people out there who do come from military background and they are familiar with the things that come with you when you come home. And with you, one of those things or the thing that we're talking about right now is gambling. What kind of stigmas exist within the military, Dave, when it comes to addiction? And how does that affect people seeking help? Because you were someone that this incident spotlighted you, right? And this isn't something that you were able to just identify. And this isn't something that you just decided to come forward with. So that's what I'm looking for here. What kinds of stigmas?
I hid from it until I wasn't able to hide from it anymore. And that still happens quite a bit in the military today. You ask the question, how is basically addiction handled within the military environment? Well, it depends on the addiction. For alcohol use, there are actually structured policies that can allow soldier, sailor, airman, marine to get into treatment, to get it treated so they can go back to the workforce and still be part of the military. And they know that. Most soldiers know that. And there's a willingness to step into that treatment so they can salvage their career. For substance use, it's a little different because it depends on the severity, but still there are treatment programs. For gambling, there's nothing. There's no treatment program. Still in the military, gambling is treated as a disciplinary issue and as a financial issue. So because of that, people are a little afraid to come forward because they don't want to lose security clearances. Right. They don't want to get disciplined or get in trouble for it. So there's hesitance to come forward and say, I have a problem with gambling. And that plus the fact that there's still a gap in knowledge of people realizing and awareness that this is an addiction and that this can be treated.
So Dave, just really quick. So I remember you mentioning at the end when they were going to discharge you honorably that they were like, well, we don't know what to do with you. And, you should go and get some help. So you're saying like after all this time that they still have not established some type of gambling addiction program in the military?
No, here's what I'll say, Gwen, is that it is improving. Right? There are more conversations. There are more policies that are beginning to show up within the military community regarding gambling. But it's not nearly enough and it moves extremely slowly. I'm in contact with a number of different active duty individuals who get a hold of me. They find me through my podcast and just want to talk. Half of them won't even give me their name because they're afraid they're going to get in trouble. And they say, when they go to bring up gambling, it's brought up as a financial problem. It's not brought up as an addiction. And that's what a lot of what I do. I work to change that perception, me and a lot of other people. Please don't misunderstand me. It's not me. It's me and a lot of other people work to change that perception.
Yeah. Well, maybe we need to send a DSM-5 to the Department of Defense.
Believe me, trust me, they have them. There's actually one military service, and I can't go into any sort of detail, but they're actually beginning to take all of their drug and alcohol counselors and finally beginning to cross-train them in the nuances of gambling disorder and how to treat gambling disorder. So, like I said, things are moving. There are changes taking place. It's just happening very slowly.
Right. That's unfortunate. How has your personal recovery journey influenced the way that you support veterans and other service members that are struggling with gambling addiction?
The answer to your question is it's become my life's work.
Love it.
Yeah. My whole mission revolves around, number one, raising awareness, and number two, providing access to support for service members and or veterans who might be struggling with this addiction and looking for help. My whole job, the very first words and the very last words of my book are, this is a story of hope. My whole mission is around raising hope and raising awareness. So to answer your question, it literally changed the way I look at things. This is how I give back to a military community that I took from when I was in my gambling addiction.
Wow.
That's awesome. It really is.
Wow. Dave, for reference, can you share with the listeners how many years you have behind you of recovery, of abstinence from gambling?
I'm at my clean date for my last recovery was January 6th of 2020. So I'm about 5.5 years into my recovery at this point.
And in your view, what's needed to create a stronger culture of support and awareness around gambling addiction in the military?
I think it all starts with education. All of the military branches have monthly, quarterly, semi-annual, annual training where they talk about things like equal opportunity. They talk about things like consideration of others. They'll talk about alcohol and drug awareness. If you once every 6 months gave soldiers, sailors, airmen, Marines 10 minutes of training into gambling, that it is an addiction and that there is help out there and how to access that help, you can immediately start breaking down that stigma. Just by that tiny little bit of awareness. People, right. Because oftentimes these service members don't even know what they don't know right now. So just starting to breach that, I think, is a good starting point.
Right.
That's true.
Dave, let's talk about your 3 pillars of recovery. Can you kind of give us an overview?
Sure. And what I'm going to say, these things are not new, right? I learned these from my experiences, not only in treatment, but in my education as well, and just kind of formulated it into my own words. And what I found is there are 3 pillars that can help somebody really solidify their recovery. The first of which is roadblocks. Okay. Stopping the bleeding. And I'll use gambling as the example because that's my addiction. How do you stop yourself from access to gambling? And there are things like self-exclusion, either within a state or through an online operator. There are things like getting a loved one to take over finances. These are things that they're just designed to stop the bleeding, right? Self-exclusion is not a cure. It's just a way to cut off the access to the gambling. So that's part 1.
Right.
Part 2 is accountability. Accountability not just to our loved ones, not just to the people that are important to us, but accountability to ourselves. I had to become accountable to my own emotional state. And I had to I had to be willing to recognize that this is where I am, right? And say, I feel bad right now, or I feel scared right now, or whatever it happens to be, and then be accountable to somebody else with that so I can do something about it different versus reaching out to an addiction. So that's part 2. And then part 3, which to me is the most powerful of the 3, is connection, which is being around other people who are on a similar journey. I've often said I go to Gamblers Anonymous. It's a 12-step self-help. And when I'm in that room, I often say that the power of this room and the energy of this room is stronger than any one person in this room. So I get my recovery by tapping into that energy and tapping into that power. So just to sum it up, I mean, basically, those are kind of my 3 pillars. It's roadblocks, accountability, and connection.
So in the vein of roadblocks, Dave, because you've had quite a journey and I'm sure you've experienced a lot, seen a lot. Can you share with us an example when it comes to roadblocks? Absolutely.
Yeah. I mean, I put in my own journey after my relapse, we put a few roadblocks almost immediately into place. Number 1, I'm from Pennsylvania, and in Pennsylvania, you can go online and you can self-exclude not only from physical casinos, but also from online and iGaming. So my wife and I sat down, and right in front of her, I went on and did self-exclusion for both physical casinos and online gaming. And it took about an hour to do it. I know not all states offer online self-exclusions. Some states don't even offer self-exclusions, but many do. And it's worth visiting, a state's website to see if they offer gambling self-exclusion. So that was the first thing that I did. And then immediately I turned all of my finances over to my wife. She controls all of our money. I don't know what's in my bank account. I have a debit card that I carry when I travel because I speak all over the country. And when I go, I have to, of course, pay for hotels and food and all that. But What I do is every time that I get a receipt, if I go to a restaurant and I sit down at the airport before I fly and I get something to eat, the minute I get the receipt from that, I take a picture of it and I send it to my wife. And I carry that physical receipt so that when I come home, I can give those to her. It makes me, it's not only the roadblock of not having the immediate access to the money, but that also leads into the accountability, and I'll get to that in a little bit here, of making sure that I'm being accountable to what I'm spending. The roadblock portion of that is just not having access to any kind of money. And it's gotten to the point where if somebody gives me, I've had a group gave me a $100 Visa gift card for work that I had done for them.
Mm-hmm.
Those roadblocks have taken me to the point where the minute I got that card, the first thing I do is call my wife and say, hey, I got a $100 gift card. I want to make sure I give it to you when I get home. That's how powerful these roadblocks have become. And there are people who would say, well, if I turn all my money over to somebody else, it's embarrassing and this and that. Let me be honest with you. I don't even know, Corinne, you and I have known each other for a little while. I don't even know if you knew that I don't have access to my own money. Nobody knows unless I tell them. They don't know I don't have access to my own money. To them, I look pretty normal. But to me, it takes away temptation of what to do with money because it's not there. I don't have access to it. And I still get what I want.
So it's almost like you protecting yourself from yourself in a way.
That's exactly what it is. That's exactly what it is. The impulse won't come up if there's nothing to, if there's nowhere to go with that impulse. So and I had some, I went through some urges early in my recovery, but when the urge comes up, the first thought is, well, I can't do anything about it. So I might as well let that go. And it allows the urge to kind of pass.
Right.
Oh my gosh. This is like discipline when it comes to you established a boundary. You've been disciplining yourself to just abide by your own newly written rule of how it has to go. And that's what you need. And I say this all the time. Different gamblers need different things to support them, but all gamblers need support.
Right.
Completely agree.
So, Corinne, how about a little trivia? Do you have
how about it? Yes, I do. So listeners, this question is something I don't expect you to know, but I really want you to think hard. What is the average amount of time it takes for someone with a gambling disorder to seek help after their behavior becomes problematic? We'll be back with an answer shortly.
I bet it's going to be a good one.
Mm-hmm.
So thinking about accountability, Dave, how do you work with your clients on getting them to start understanding and, putting that into action?
I think accountability starts with willingness and acceptance. The willingness to accept that, yes, I have an issue and that I'm going to need help to do this. And then it kind of moves into, where do I need to be accountable? I think that's a good conversation to have, is where do I need to be accountable? So if I'm working with somebody who is an online gambler, right, who does everything from their phone, and they might even be in their bathroom or even in the middle of a conversation playing on their phone, then maybe that accountability starts with, all right, how do you limit phone access? Or how do you become accountable for what you're doing while you're on your phone? And that could be, hey, spouse, or hey, significant other, or hey, best friend, every couple of hours, I want you to check my phone and see what I'm doing, or just check in with me and see what I'm doing, and I think it's on the client. It's on the person in recovery to take that step. It's not somebody else's responsibility to create that accountability. It's the person in recovery needs to take that step in accountability. Then it's being accountable, like I mentioned earlier, maybe for finances. So like I said, whenever I pay for something, I immediately, and I do this with my own clients, I suggest to them that if you are going to keep your own credit card, your own debit card, that everything you spend money on, and I don't care if it's a pack of gum, I don't care what it is. If you spend money on it, take a picture of it and send it to your accountability person if you happen to have an accountability person, which hopefully most people do. Mm-hmm. Hopefully most people have somebody. And even if there's not a family member or a loved one, you can get into a 12-step group and find a sponsor that can be your accountability person, right?
Right.
So, and that's the point, honestly, and it's good that you asked this question, because oftentimes this is the point where I'll get some pushback from people. And it's just human nature. I don't want to, and I'll be like, look, let me ask you a question. What lengths were you willing to go to support your addiction? Did you manipulate? Did you lie? And oftentimes the answer are yes, yes, yes. Mm-hmm. All right. My next question is, what are you willing to do to support your recovery? If your recovery is that important to you, find an accountability person and find ways to be accountable to you and to that person, because at the end of the day, it's not about the other person. It's about the person in recovery.
Absolutely.
Because if I can be accountable for me, then I'm being accountable to my wife. I'm being accountable to my children. All of those things will come naturally if I'm being accountable to myself first and foremost.
Right, right. I've often mentioned something similar to my clients. If you've put so much energy, time, work into your gambling addiction, it's going to take that much work and probably even more, to
More,
recover.
yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I totally agree with that, because remember, the habits that we formed to get to this point didn't happen overnight. Yeah. Oftentimes we're talking years, and for some people a lifetime. For people who grew up, and again, I use the example of gambling. For people who grew up where culturally it was okay for gambling, you're talking about a lifetime of beliefs that have to kind of be untangled. That's not going to happen overnight, and it's going to take a lot of work.
Right.
You know what I've been noticing when it comes to that is how big and powerful shame can be for a person when it comes to this piece. It's, not wanting to have to admit you need certain levels of help. The accountability you ask for, maybe that exposes more about you to this person. And I think that that's where things like emotional regulation, getting into counseling, getting yourself a coach or a therapist come into play, because if you are not addressing the emotional irregulation that's going on inside of you, then that's a barrier between you and recovery.
Right.
Completely agree. Yeah. And that takes that level of willingness. I had alluded to it earlier. For me, to sum it up, I summed it up as getting uncomfortable, right? Allow yourself to get uncomfortable. I've even said, and I've said this in group before, sometimes you just got to let it suck. It's just got to stink for a little while, and it does get better. That's part of that emotional regulation. That's part of opening up the vault and just allowing it to learn a different way to process, right?
Yes, absolutely.
So.
Right, right. Well, Corinne,
yes, it is.
We are ready for a trivia answer.
It is that time. You're not going to believe the answer, though, Gwen. Well, you might believe it, Dave. You might. What is the average amount of time it takes for someone with a gambling disorder to seek help after their behavior becomes problematic? According to the National Council on Problem Gambling, an article from 2022, 10 years, approximately 10 years.
Wow. It sounds like all three of us have a lot of work to do.
Well, that's why we're here. And if you think about it, think about the people who are in recovery and how long it takes some of those people to become abstinent. I can believe this source because when you think back to the shame, the guilt, the I have access to money, the maybe I'm not getting caught. Maybe I know it's a problem and I just don't want help. Maybe I don't know I need help. So I think factoring all those things in here is probably what makes this true versus someone who is in a severe state. I don't believe that someone in a severe state would take that.
Even if it's a problem gambling, I mean, just think about the issues, the stress. Still,
oh my gosh, yes.
That may be 10 years of living paycheck to paycheck. That's hard.
Yes. And being in denial, because I actually know some of these people in my personal life where it's been a long time. It's been like their life, but it's not always like in the forefront to people on the outside. It's like a roller coaster. Sometimes they're fine for a little bit. Sometimes it's back up, but they're never really okay because, like you said, it's the paycheck to paycheck. It's the borrowing from other people. It's kind of like what you described, Dave, when you were saying how it was almost like a bleed out when it happened with you. As you went in, you were okay, and then boom, it just kept on expanding.
Right. Yeah, and the other part of that is the amount of time it takes somebody to begin to realize what it really takes to be in recovery. Yeah. Oftentimes you get people who will have stretches, and you guys know what the pink cloud is, and they'll have a pink cloud stretch and everything. Life is wonderful. And then reality in life comes back and they don't have the coping strategies down to be able to deal with it. So they go back to old habits. I mean, relapse is very common in this addiction. It's no surprise to me it takes so long to really start to establish, long-term recovery. I mean, look at me. I was 7 years in the addiction my first time around, and then went another 4 before I finally got it to where I feel like I'm honestly in a real recovery.
Yeah.
Now, Dave, I want to ask you specifically about that, because you started recovery a while back, and then you had a stretch of time with abstinence and no relapse, and then you relapsed. How many times did you relapse, and what were the stretches of time? And the reason I'm asking this is because some gamblers out there are really struggling when they gain a certain amount of time and relapse, and it feels like giving up all, it's just why do I even do this? I'm so, I'm such a bad person. It's all the wrong thoughts will rush into them. And I just want you to share this so they can understand that relapse is a part of your recovery journey and you can get back out there and maintain your abstinence.
Yeah. And it's a great question because it was probably, I don't know, I probably had 4 really good years of recovery on my belt before it really started to erode and I moved back towards relapse. But I'm going to be honest with you, the relapse started before that because I had been going to 12-step meetings. I'd been going to counseling. I'd been doing all those things. And I started to feel strong. I'm like, I had no urges to gamble. I had no desire to gamble. And the thought that's going through my head is I'm cured. I don't need this gambling thing anymore. So I don't need to do counseling. I don't need to do 12-step groups. I have this. I'm good. And what happens is though, when I stepped away from it and I didn't maintain the things that were keeping me healthy, little by little, old thoughts start creeping back in. I have to remember this is a lifetime of beliefs that you're trying to change over in a year, 2 years, 3 years, 4 years, right? If it took me a lifetime to get to this point, it's going to take me a lifetime to stay where I am now. So, and my first time around, I didn't really think that way. The way I thought was once I felt good, I didn't need all those things anymore to help me. So little by little, it started to creep back in and it built up to the point where it got very bad. The difference between 2007 when I first stepped into recovery and 2020 when I did it again is in 2007, I knew I had a gambling problem. In 2020, I knew I was powerless over it unless I continued to stay attached to my recovery. The phrase you'll often hear people say is, this is a disease. I need to take my medicine. And sometimes that can get tedious. That can feel tedious. If we truly want to stay in recovery and we want to move forward, let those tedious times happen because on the other side of it, there become far more good times than there are tedious times. I love my life now. I love who I am now. I love that I can be so present in everybody's lives now. But it took me a while to get here and I had to be willing to do the work to get here.
Right. So what you're saying is just what I've shared with many of my clients. Sometimes complacency can be the number one offender. Feeling like I got this, everything's good, I'm feeling good, I can do this. Yeah.
Yeah, I think I got this are the 3 most dangerous words somebody can say in recovery. That's just my opinion.
Right. I agree with you.
Yeah.
So, Dave, how does connection impact one's recovery?
Well, I can tell you how it impacted mine. My very first time in treatment in 2007, I told you guys, I went to a VA out in Ohio. There was a Gamblers Anonymous meeting right there on the campus that we were required to go to. And I can remember the first meeting I was going to go to. I was so skeptical. I'm like, all right, we're going to walk in here. We're all going to hold hands. We're going to sing Kumbaya and the world's going to be great. And I was skeptical walking in. Well, I get into this meeting. I sit down. We read through a book, a pamphlet that's a standard. It's called the Combo Book, and it's very standard in Gamblers Anonymous meetings. And then people started telling, they picked a topic for the night and the first person started talking about his experiences on that topic. And I remember sitting there thinking, how in the world does this person know about me? And then the next person got up and started talking. And I'm like, wait a minute, this person knows about me too. And in that moment and on that day and in that first meeting, I started to understand what the power of connection is. Because as these people were talking and as they were sharing their stories and as they were sharing the things that were working for them, not only was I learning from them, but I was connecting with their journey. And by connecting with their journey, it made my journey seem not so daunting anymore, right? So just to be able to talk to somebody who gets it, just to be able to step into a room and say something to somebody who gets what you're saying makes a huge difference in our ability to say, okay, I think I can do this.
Right.
Absolutely. Wow. Dave, for listeners who are in recovery, what are some practical steps they can take to start applying these pillars in their own lives right now, today?
I think I've mentioned some of them. Some good practical steps are, first of all, open the lines of communication, right? So with all 3 of these pillars, whether it's roadblocks, accountability, or connection, communication is the key. So if you're going to establish roadblocks, right, first of all, let somebody know you're doing it, because then that holds you accountable to stick with those roadblocks. Okay. That's part of it. And then with connection, if you're going to go to, and there's not just Gamblers Anonymous out there. Don't get me wrong. Gamblers Anonymous is a powerful program. I go to a meeting every single week, but it's not the only path to recovery. Right. There are other groups out there. There's Smart Recovery. There's many, many different forms of recovery out there, but it's still about the same thing, which is connecting with other people who can understand where you are. Right. And when you get into that environment and you found that group that you're okay being around to connect with, then the next step is start getting uncomfortable and opening up a little bit and just try something. You don't have to give out your whole life story if that's not what you want to do. Pick something small and say something you would not have said before you walked into that group. Just try it and see how it feels. And in my experience and with the people I've worked with in experience, when they do that, they normally come out of it and go, wow, I'm glad I did that. So I think practical steps is small steps, right? But very intentional. Be intentional with what you do. If I'm going to put a roadblock in place, I'm going to make sure that I follow through with this roadblock. If I'm going to be accountable to somebody, I'm going to make sure that I follow through with that accountability, whether it's receipts, whether it's telling them how I feel, whatever it is. And if I'm going to connect with other people, then I'm going to truly try to connect. So being intentional is really important.
Right. So, Dave, before we wrap up, do you have any final thoughts or words of encouragement for our listeners?
Yeah, I wrap my own podcast up with this pretty much every time that I do it, which is if you're sitting right now and you're feeling like the road is cloudy, the road's muddy, you're not sure where to go, it doesn't feel like you're moving in the direction you want, you've tried multiple different things and it just doesn't seem to be working, keep trying. There's hope, right? If you've tried the same thing 3 times and it doesn't work, try something else. There are many, many resources out there on the internet now to be able to learn more and connect more with people who are doing this every single day. And if what you're doing isn't working, you can learn a different way to do it. You can learn. You have to decide that I'm going to learn. Once you've made the decision, it might take a while and it might take some work and it might be rough work, but it will pay dividends. There will be a result at the end that can be helpful.
Absolutely.
Yes. And Dave, how can people connect with you or learn more about your work?
I think the easiest way is just checking out my website, which is www.daveyeager-fallin.com. That website has access to my podcast, my book, different resources for military service members, veterans, and gambling. That's probably the easiest way to reach me.
Okay, thank you. And Dave, you have been such a pleasure to have here with us today.
No, thank you so much for coming on. I know that our listeners are definitely going to benefit from the things that you shared with us today.
Absolutely.
It's an honor to be able to do it. Thank you for reaching out and asking. I really do appreciate it.
Thank you. You're very welcome. And Corinne, we cannot end this show without giving our listeners some homework.
Absolutely not. For homework, we would like to challenge you to come up with at least one of your own pillars for recovery. What's 1 to 3 things, actually, that you can do to anchor yourself? Consider Dave's pillars as things you can actually borrow if you don't want to come up with different ones. But what we want you to do is establish yourself and ground yourself in something like Dave has, because the journey of recovery is not limited to tools that are out there. You can use 1,000 different ways. And like Dave said, when you're pushing forward, continue to think about what does work for you. If something doesn't work, just pivot to the next. So with this in mind, we want to encourage you to tune into the next episode, Building Connection, the Foundation Before Accountability.
Addiction doesn't define you, and breaking up with it doesn't have to be a solo mission. Kindbridge Behavioral Health offers safe, non-judgmental support anytime from anywhere. Visit kindbridge.com/appointments and start getting the help you deserve today.